The Cavs are 9-13 on the road, being considered one of the worst teams away from home. Actually, there are only a handful of teams that are over 500. What's so challenging about playing on the road in the NBA?
Well, this is a fun question because, other than doing a deep dive into the analytics and the finer stats of various teams and all of that, I'm just going to go by the eye test. And I'm going to say that the road in the NBA is harder for various reasons. Some of them are obvious, discomforts of being on the road, staying at a hotel rather than being at home, home-cooked meals compared to meals on the road, all that stuff, time changes in routines, the crowd, how they get involved, whether they're on your side or not, all that stuff makes a big difference. But I'm going to lean very heavily on the refs. Because I have always believed that the NBA is really a home court advantage kind of sport. That a lot of the time when you're at home, you're going to get those hometown calls. And it's part of the reason why, as a Cavs fan, I've been so frustrated most of the time rooting for them. Because it's like the refs forget that when they come here. They hardly ever seem to fall towards towards a call that is in favor of us, especially down the stretch in the waning minutes of the game. So many times a visiting team gets a call that, to me, it's like, wait a minute, I have to rub my eyes. Where are we playing? Are we there or are we here? So my bias, and again from my eye test, a lot of the time I think the officiating is a big reason. You just see the home team get to the line more, get more favorable calls, and that could be because of the crowd. The crowd could be influencing the refs as well. You don't want 30,000 people behind you to want to mob you at the end of the game. But other than that, I don't really know what else to say. I think that in some ways you could maybe point to conditioning, and that it's easier for these guys to be rested and ready to go when they're at home than on the road, especially because a lot of the time the NBA puts these guys on the road for stretches at a time. So they're gone for 4 or 5 games in a row. That's going to be more difficult for their conditioning as well. So I'll add that in the end, just as a more serious possibility. What else do you think? What other things could be contributing to the fact that there's such a discrepancy in the NBA? Because right now there's only 5 teams that are above 500 on the road, and they're not even teams that you necessarily would think. Like the Nets are in there. It's the Celtics, Nets, Knicks, Grizzlies, and Nuggets. That's it. Everybody else has a negative road record.
I do think that your initial point, even though it's kind of said in jest, is pretty accurate. I've always felt like there is home court advantage when it comes to the refs. We just saw that on the most recent road trip with the weird Clarkson calls. We put a lot of emphasis on LeVert getting his head in the game, but at the same time, the refs were still making those calls were things that I have never seen happen in the NBA, those types of foul calls. So those were out of nowhere, and those were for the home court team, and they were down going into that possession, and then magically they were up. I believe that has happened to the Cavs a few times with a home court versus away advantage for the refs. So I do think that there is a nugget of truth to that, and I think that you see that in a lot of sports. I think that it is difficult to not have kind of that home court or home field advantage, and that does bleed into the officiating at times. Now, what I'll also say too, I think this year that has happened more often is teams are getting more sick on the road. I think that that's something that we have seen where, because guys are all traveling together, because they're all eating together and hanging out together, one guy will get a bug and then the rest of them get sick. And I think that that is a little more commonplace, especially right now, coming out of and still dealing with a global pandemic where everybody has noted that people's immune systems are all weird and shot. And then the last thing I would say is I think that it's just hard for teams and players to get a real feel in basketball when you're on the opponent's court, the away court. You know, I have been a Pacers fan in on some level in my past life, not my past life, but when I was younger, and I'm not a spy. Anyway, you're
not reincarnated either. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So the Pacers, when Reggie Miller was there, a lot of teams had success against the Pacers against them because they talked a lot about how, for whatever reason, the way that their baskets were positioned or the way that their hoops were made or whatever, people felt like their hoops were friendlier and they could shoot from the outside better and put up better numbers. The Pacers were still a solid team, but for some reason, people just mentioned that. I know that the Bulls mentioned that a lot, and the Knicks mentioned that a lot when they would play against them, especially in playoff series. And I think that that's the other thing that we're especially seeing with the Cavs is our really good shooters, mainly Donovan right now and Darius, still have times where they struggle against opponents because their spots on the floor and then the rim that they're used to and just the feel of the floor is so much different for them that it's hard for them to get into the groove of the game at times. So that's the other thing I would say is in basketball, unlike football or baseball, maybe baseball a little bit, but or soccer, you know, in basketball, if you're taking a shot on, you know, at the elbow, that feels different in different places, where I think in football, when you're behind center, you know.
Right.
So that's the other thing I would say is just the feel is a little bit different, especially for these young players.
Yeah, feel, I think, when I used to play the game, and I never got to play at this level,
No.
but when I used to play, you know, you come on the court and sometimes you just feel like you're going to have a great game. You know? And I think it's that comfort that you feel by stepping into that environment that makes you feel that way. And you can see that from certain individuals like Jordan, that, you know, he always had great games at the Garden. You know, he was never a Knick, but he always had great games there because for whatever reason, it was just, he felt good to play there. So yeah, feel is a big part of the game for sure. And I would also mention just at the end, something else that I thought of while you were talking about those points. I wonder as well, we'd have to look at the stats of it, but are teams resting certain players more on the road than they do at home? And they probably are. I know we had a game recently where they rested Mitchell because they're not going to do that to the home fans if they can avoid that. But on the road, there's an opportunity to say, okay, well, we just did a back-to-back. Like, we're not going to bring this guy out tonight. And that will affect the record as well. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, we noted when the Cavs schedule dropped, unlike previous years, this year I felt like their road trip and road trips have been much more evenly split. This has been one of their longest road trips, but compared to previous seasons, I felt like they were on 7 or 8 game road trips at times.
They were.
That were completely, you know, just killed the team. And I think if our team was better back then, we would have had players resting more and whatnot, but Sexton and Garland were asked to play because they were young enough that really wasn't warranted. So that's the other thing I totally agree with you is some of these other teams that we don't watch as often, they might be on a 7-game or 8-game road trip and they need to have their players rest because that's just the way the NBA works.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to the Cavaliers Basketball Club podcast. Let's go Cavs!